Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Madisonville Marine. Since 1976, they've been East Tennessee's best boat dealer. Their selection of boats is huge, draws in boaters from across the state and all across the nation. I've told you this before, you've got people who buy at madmarine.com and then have them ship the boats to California, to Texas, to Florida. That's ridiculous. Why would they use a boat dealer in a small town in East Tennessee? Well, what does that tell you? It tells you there's no better place to buy a boat in America than Madisonville Marine. They do a great job. Go down and see Joe Special and their team this week at Highway 411 North in Madisonville. All right, we do a lot of talking on college sports talk shows like this and radio elsewhere. Culture. Culture. Well, you got to get a new culture. We talked about it earlier. Josh Heupel seems to have built a good culture. I believe in the culture talk. There is something to that. There is something about a belief, a camaraderie. There is something to be said for discipline. To an extent, you look at Georgia right now, and here's the reason I'm asking this question. Does culture matter? Georgia just had another player, a freshman, hit with a traffic violation for driving 88 in a 55. And you may be saying, oh, well, yes, they've had traffic violations. Well, that includes DUIs, drag racing, reckless driving, speeding arrests, and of course the death of a player and a staffer in one of those drag racing instances, to the tune of nearly 300. So when you're sitting there thinking, well, they've had a few, 300 since Kirby Smart took over? 300 is nonsensical. And then the Atlanta Journal-Constitution recently did a report where they had dug in and found that Georgia had had numerous players accused of sexual assault, domestic violence, illegal possession of firearms, only to remain on the team. They kept them on the team. So my question is, I believe in culture, but at some point, if you've got enough talent, does culture not matter? Chuck?
Apparently not at Georgia. I mean, when you're just coaching players and it's what you do on the practice field and what you do in games, that you can basically get away with anything, and you can over a period of time. And when is Kirby Smart going to be held accountable
Okay,
for all
well,
this?
that's not the point.
Yes.
I know
But he's
Tennessee
in charge
fan
of
wants
the
to
culture.
attack Georgia.
He's in charge of the culture, and it's freshmen, that are now doing it. That's what the culture is. I'm taking the keys away from them. That's
See,
what
to me, I don't understand how this hasn't ended. It would be very simple if I were the coach. Next guy with a traffic violation, I don't care if you're the starting quarterback or the walk-on place kicker, you're gone, done, next traffic violation. They obviously don't do that with gun charges, sexual assault, domestic violence, and I'm not just trying to crap all over Georgia here. There have been instances at Tennessee where you were the outlaw program. Miami was an outlaw program and won 5 national titles while outlawing their way to the top. So I'm just wondering, where is that line between culture and talent? Because at some point, the talent outdoes the culture, in my opinion. I'm putting this together now at the age of 50.
Don't you think that it's football's this, everything else is this in Georgia, right? Even with what we read in the AJC, there were little hints of that of when the guys came to be a character witness for a player that was in court, we promised coach that we would have him back on the practice field on time, right? Kind of, he just washes his hands of everything else but the football side. I think that you don't have to have that kind of off-the-field discipline. You can have that kind of off-the-field discipline issue in the short term and still be successful, but it always blows up on you. If you look at Art Briles in Baylor, Jimbo Fisher at Florida State, the U eventually blew up, Oklahoma eventually blew up. It's going to blow up at Georgia at some point in time if they don't clean it up, but short term, you can get a lot of wins.
I think if you ask people around Georgia, I think what they would say is, okay, there's a football culture of like everyone knows what's expected of you in the weight room and practice and games, and then everything else outside of that is sort of its other thing. You know, it doesn't matter what I do when I'm in my car. It doesn't matter what I do at the hotel. That may or may not be true, but I think that's how they would view it. And I think I remember at the national championship, I was talking to some Georgia players after the game, and there were multiple that were convinced that a lot of people had picked them to go 7-5. And so I think what you may see in this whole thing is a sort of a circle the wagons of the world is against us. And if anything, it may have a positive impact on the field, which is not great in terms of just the morality of the whole thing, the handling of the whole thing. Kirby has been, everybody gets punished internally. The big cry you hear out of Georgia is, well, you need to say what you're doing because some of these guys seem to be missing game time. So, it's not a good situation. I think everybody knows at this point, if you're blind to it, you haven't been paying attention, that college football is a dirty game. And right now you're seeing some of the seedy underbelly at Georgia that, hey, you want to talk about developing men, developing people, everyone wants to say that, And then when you have some of these issues that can affect you later in life or affect you, or affect your teammates and all that stuff, nothing's done.
Good culture or good talent? What you choosing?
I think David kind of said it how I would view it. I think culture is very important when it comes to winning games. If that's all we're talking about, it's important when it comes to players all knowing how to work, pull in the same direction, be a good team together. Some of this stuff can undermine that, especially if you come into issues with how you're punishing players and it being perceived as uneven. That's where when players start pointing the finger about how you're handling it, that's when that becomes a problem. Otherwise, I think some of this stuff can be, not to diminish it, but it might not matter on the winning side. Like you said, there's a history of Miami and even Tennessee. What's the joke Tennessee fans have made when a player gets arrested? We're back. There's a history of programs getting by things like this because, and if you have players all pulling in the right direction, not being selfish, you can still win football.
How many games has Georgia won in the last 3 years? What, it got one loss? Yeah. That's what matters.
Well, see, and that's also, I think that talent trumps culture. You can have, we all talk about culture and how much you've got to have it, unless you're one of the top 5 most talented teams in the country, and then you can take your
if
culture
the culture
and
in
do
the
whatever.
facility works, because I think A&M under Sumlin is a really good example of they had a bunch of dudes there, but there was not a level of commitment there. You're Johnny Football showing up to meetings late. There's not a lot of film study, all that stuff. I think when it comes to the football aspect of it, Georgia's locked in, and I think to Ryan's point, it's an uncomfortable reality, but acknowledging that this is probably how this is going to play out is not excusing it. It's just I think you're going to see them circle the wagons. I think you're going to see them say, "This doesn't have anything to do with football." We don't like
I know what
this.
they're going to say. I don't care what they're going to say.
But they don't like
also-
this.
say
They don't
the
like
same thing-
this, but it's like
they say
stuff
the
keeps
same
happening.
thing Tennessee fans said, and the same thing Tennessee coaches said, and the same things Alabama says, and they all say the same thing. One thing that I find interesting is we're trying to separate now. Well, culture just means this; it doesn't mean that. For years, all I've heard is when you had discipline issues, it's like, well, there's your culture. And now with Georgia, you seem to be saying, well, but discipline doesn't really count as culture. I'm just saying that I think culture is important unless you get to a certain level where you got so much talent that it doesn't matter. You can go out and get arrested. We're going to keep you on the field, and we're going to win because we got winners out here. That's my take. That culture at a top 5 program, I just think Georgia's got the best players.
And I think it depends on the handling of the player. That was Philip Fulmer. I think got a lot of credit from players sometimes for being lenient with some guys that needed a second chance, and sometimes it backfired when he would give them.
He had the greatest ever. I forget which year it was. It was against Arkansas. The 3 guys got in trouble.
Yeah.
The starter sat for a quarter. The backup sat for a half. The bench warmer sat for the whole game. That was the punishment.
And
as if nobody noticed, how come that worked that way? But anyway.
and those kinds of things are where it can undermine a team culture, and that's where it becomes a real detriment.
I still think I go back to the sexual assault thing is a separate conversation. But if you had guys die earlier in that season and you've still got a drag racing problem and you've got guys going 88 and 50, to me that's disrespectful to somebody that was in my building that died. It's like if you're
2
going to
people
keep,
in the building who died.
Yes, 2 people.
A teammate and a staff.
If you have that and that's still happening, I just keep coming back to that. To me, is disrespectful of these relationships that you want to say you hold so dear.
Is that some new thing that I've missed out on? Is drag racing? Are we
It
back
seems
to
to be a
1950s?
uniquely Georgia
that's
problem,
the
which is
issue.
very weird.
You're
Which to me
drag
gets-
racing SUVs at 100 miles an hour.
Which goes directly to their culture. That is a Georgia culture thing because I've not seen. Well, boy, this drag racing stuff has become a real problem.
Not a thing in a lot of. I haven't seen it anywhere else.
All right, very good. When we come back, let's talk about SEC predictions. All right, it's July. What are we going to be talking about in December? We're going to make our predictions. We'll see how outlandish they are. Next, going back on the Sports Source.